and welcome and thank you for your attention. This is Paleoanthropology, Apes or Man, Part 3. This again is a 4-part series. We'll be covering Paleoanthropology, Apes or Man. We're going to be looking at the 20 most popular examples. Again, my name is Jason Gardner. I'm not a scientist, so I'll be referencing 10 PhDs from geology, paleobiochemistry, paleontology, genetics, and anthropology. But before we begin, I have a quick intro video.
We've done surveys on college campuses just to determine what are people thinking these days about where we came from. And we get similar results every time we ask this question. Do you believe in evolution? Yes or no?
I'm definitely a believer in evolution. Definitely came from apes and then evolved into what we are now.
We came from chimpanzees, monkeys.
They came from like gorillas and evolved into what we are now.
I definitely believe in evolution, that human beings have evolved from Neanderthals.
A lot of time being in school, it's explained pretty well in my opinion.
That's kind of like what they instilled into our brains, and here we are.
Most said yes. Almost all of them said yes. What led you to that conclusion? Or what's the most convincing evidence for evolution to you? And then it was multiple choice. It was like fossils, natural selection, dinosaurs, human evolution, and they selected human evolution more than any of the other categories. This idea of humans having evolved from apes or ape-like ancestors, it pervades our society. And it stands in stark contrast to what Genesis teaches about where we came from. Did we come from apes? Did we come from Adam? So when we look at the scientific evidence, what we're looking for is which idea, which history, Genesis, creation from Adam, or long ages of morphing between animals through apes to man, where does the evidence land on which side? Now, there's a united front in the museums and in school textbooks and teachers and classrooms, public school classrooms, etc. And that united front says human evolution. The scientists say it. We trust what the scientists say. So what I've done is I've looked at what the scientists are saying to themselves behind closed doors, as it were, in the scientific technical literature. Not the textbooks, but the technical literature. And what we found is a completely different story. Not a united front at all.
So let's contrast this story to what the Bible actually says. In Genesis chapter 1, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. So the purpose of covering this is to show there is strong evidence that Charles Darwin and others were incorrect in the interpretation of the data. Human beings are wonderfully made in God's image. The theory of biological design is the best explanation, and we'll be covering that in part 4. And the Bible account in Genesis is trustworthy and accurate history. How many of us have seen this image at some point in our lifetime? I know I've seen it. It's called the March of Progress. In 1965, natural history painter Rudolf Zallinger published this work with a caption cautioning readers that the artistic representations were based on, quote, fragmented fossil evidence. Although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, all are shown here standing for the purpose of comparison. The authors of Contested Bones state, this parade has been one of the most successful tools ever used to promote human evolution. It is constituted as a powerful visual proof of human evolution that even a small child could grasp. There were few social study classrooms and school library bulletin boards where this parade was not prominently displayed. Because of the graphic power, it is still etched into our minds for billions of people worldwide. And Thomas Huxley, back in 1863, in his book, Evidences as Man's Place in Nature, we see the skeletons of a gibbon, an orangutan, chimpanzee, gorilla, and human arranged in a series, which we now know is homology, showing the progression towards human form. So this book, The Human Evolution, The Grand Experiment, Volume 3, written by author Dr. Carl Warner. He is a medical doctor. He says in his book, during the first 100 years of the theory of human evolution, more than 100 species of ape men were named, but later declassified as either humans, apes, or animals. He has over 41 examples that are listed in the appendix of his book, and I'm going to be quoting heavily from this book in the following slides. I'll also be quoting heavily from this book, Contested Bones, by now Dr. Christopher Roop and Dr. John Sanford. So let's look at a theory in crisis. One genus is clearly ape-like. The other genus is clearly human-like. The large anatomical gap between the two kinds is very striking. For this reason, paleo experts, and paleo just means very old, paleo experts wish to bridge this gap and are especially eager to find the Australopithecus, the apes, their bones to seem more human-like, or the Homo bones, human, to seem more ape-like. And the authors of Contested Bones say this tension is abundantly apparent. Darwin said, "Why then is not every geological stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and serious objection which can be urged against the theory." And then the famous Harvard University paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould famously said, "The extreme rarity of the transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret in paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and the nodes of their branches. The rest is inference. However reasonable, not the evidence of the fossils." And the authors of Contested Bones continue by saying, "Casual examination of textbooks and mass media seems to suggest that the fossil evidence is now abundant and compelling. Scientists, like Darwin, expected that as more fossils were cataloged, the standard linear view of human evolution would come into clear focus. What has actually happened is just the opposite. After a century and a half of fossil hunting, the picture that has emerged is chaotic, messy, tangled. It's a bush, it's not a tree." So, let's look at the fraud, fakes, and the overzealous. Now that may sound a little strong and harsh, but let's look at the supporting evidence. A common theme of intent, which is a legal term, you're probably going to see is multiple examples of discoverers and these scientists wanting to become famous, to find the oldest ever, or to prove evolution is true, etc. So first, let's look at Piltdown Man. This is a fraud. In 1912, amateur geologist Charles Dawson and the British Museum announced the discovery near Piltdown, England, of a missing link between apes and humans. The specimen lay in the British Museum until it was exposed as a fake in 1953. It went for over 40 years before being exposed as a fraud. Someone had combined an ancient human skull with the lower jaw of a modern orangutan, modified to look like part of the same individual. The jaw had been chemically treated to make it look like a fossil, and its teeth had been deliberately filed down to make it look like a human. Piltdown Man remains the most famous fraud in the history of science. Yet, most modern biology textbooks do not even mention Piltdown Man. When critics of Darwinism bring it up, they're usually told that the incident merely proves that science is self-correcting. And so it was. In this case, though, the self-correcting took over 40 years. But more interesting is the lesson to be learned from Piltdown Man is that scientists, like everyone else, can be fooled into seeing what they want to see. Next is Prometheus. This was a fraud. This is Dr. Raymond Dart, and he played a critical role in advancing the idea that humans evolved from apes. In 1950, anthropologist Dr. Robert Broom praised him by saying, quote, "Here was a man who had made one of the greatest discoveries in the world's history, a discovery that may rank yet in importance with Darwin's Origin of Species." In 1925, Dr. Dart found his soon-to-be world-famous tongue-child skull, which he claimed to be an ape-man child. But this analysis was immediately rejected by the scientific community as an infant chimp, for over 2 decades. The constant criticism led Dart to have a nervous breakdown. In late 1940s, Dart explored caves in South Africa and found many broken, bashed-in baboon skulls, which he believed represented aggressive Australopithecine behavior. In his estimation, Australopithecine ape men were violent, carnivorous hunters. Dr. Dart became convinced that one of the baboon monkey skulls represented an ape man, claiming it was using fire because of blackened rocks found in the cave. In 1948, Dr. Dart reported the discovery of his fire-using proto-human, Prometheus, in the American Journal of Anthropology and Nature, soon after also being picked up by the New York Times and Time magazine. It turned out that the blackened bones were not caused by fire, but was a chemical reaction of rocks on the ceiling of the cave dripping water. Further, in 1948, Dr. Dart had measured the brain size of Prometheus and reported it to be 650 cc's. This is the equivalent brain size of the largest known gorilla of the time. Later, in 1956, he told reporters of the New York Times that, quote, Australopithecus had skulls with a capacity ranging from 1,000 cc's up. Well, now 1,000 cc's is the same size as modern humans. Dart reinforced his contention that this animal was a large-brained ape man, but all of this was wrong. The actual brain size was only 510 cc's, about the size of a chimpanzee. Australopithecines have ape-sized brains, not human brain sizes. So he incorrectly reconstructed the skull, the foramen magnum, and the pelvis reconstruction. Additionally, scientists today believe 4 animals contributed to the bone accumulation in the South African caves. These animals were leopards, hyenas, porcupines, and eagles that brought these bones into the cave. His colleague, Dr. Charles Brain, ironically his name was Dr. Brain, said, quote, I can remember one of the last things that Dr. Dart said to me before he passed away. He said, Brain, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Dr. Dart found a dead baboon and made up a story, calling his ape man Prometheus. The ape man jaw turned out to be a monkey jaw. Regarding the use of stone tools, well, he had over 14,000 stone tools, but they all turned out to be just rocks. And the bone tools, which Dart had romanticized and dramatized, turned out to be just dead animal bones and nothing more. Now, the 45 bones that were used to construct Prometheus were later found to be a combination of bones of a donkey, a dog, monkeys, water buffalo, and baboons. And the baboon skull, discovered with broken skull tops, actually broke naturally from decay and falling rocks in the cave. But Dart's actual fraud came from falsifying the brain size, which it was also later found he did with the tongue child. Dr. Dart also misidentified monkey bones as ape men in 1959, when he wrote an article for the Illustrated London News and created another ape man. The ape man also appeared in the 2001 A Space Odyssey, but Dr. Dart used a monkey skull and monkey arm bones to create this ape man. Next up, we have Nebraska Man, which was another fraud. In 1917, geologist Harold Cook finds a tooth in a creek in Nebraska and thinks little of it. But he had also found other teeth in the same creek bed that were known to have been pig's teeth. Then in 1922, Dr. Osborne, who was the president of the American Museum of Natural History, was notified by the New York Times that William Jennings Bryan had challenged him over the topic of human evolution. Harold Cook then writes to Dr. Osborne saying he's found a human-like tooth in a creek bed. Dr. Osborne announced the new type of ape-like human tooth, and 3 scientists followed with articles announcing the Nebraska ape man tooth. From 1922 to 1927, the scientists never revealed the fact that pig teeth and human teeth look similar. It was only after the famous Scopes trial was over in 1925 and after William Jennings Bryan had passed away, also in 1925, that they revealed what they called their mistake. Next up is Time magazine. In 1965, Dr. Howell's, quote, March of Progress book, which contained numerous fraud. Dr. Howell from the University of Chicago would have known in 1965 that 10 of the 14 animals he placed in the chart were not ape men. Thus, the majority of these depictions are fraudulent, according to Dr. Carl Warner, and this chart ends up being incredibly misleading. Next is The Brain Sizes by Dr. Philip Tobias in his 1971 book, The Brain in Hominid Evolution, which clearly stated that human brain sizes range from 1,000 cc's up to 2,000 cc's. But Dr. Tobias would have known that there were numerous scientific examples preceding his book in the academic literature that clearly showed otherwise. This caused this evolutionary chart to be extremely misleading. The actual data showed that Homo sapien brain sizes range from 540 cc all the way to 2,000 cc's, completely contradicting his visual representation. Next up is Java Man, and this is an example of overzealousness. In 1891, the Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois discovered the first fossil remains that are currently classified as Homo erectus. Charles Darwin's newly published works inspired Dubois, and so he set off to the Indonesian island of Java in search of the missing link between apes and humans. Along the riverbanks, he found a tooth, a skull cap, and a femur bone. The femur was definitely human, but the skull cap had some unusual features, in particular a low forehead and a heavy brow ridge. Dubois interpreted the skull cap as having ape-like qualities, in accordance with Dubois' firm belief that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. Dubois hid the fossils under the floorboards of his kitchen and eventually moving them to a locked room in the Netherlands Museum, out of sight and out of mind for 27 years. When scientists found more complete skeletons, it became obvious that Dubois was wrong. Some evolution scientists now refer to Java Man as Homo sapien. Next is Libyan Man, another example of overzealousness. In 1979, a new type of ape man was discovered in Libya, North Africa, apparently the oldest ape man ever to be found in the African continent. The discovery had caused some scientists to rewrite the theory of human evolution. Dr. Noel Boaz of NYU organized a team of 35 international scientists to find the oldest ape man ever to have lived. An interesting point, Dr. Boaz had been heavily influenced as a high school student by Dr. Howell's 1965 Time magazine book and diagram. This project was funded by multiple organizations, including National Geographic, NYU, and the Leakey Foundation. After a year of searching, the team found their ape fossil. It was an ape man collarbone. When looked at from one angle, it resembled a chimp bone, but when rotated, it resembled a human collarbone. But Boaz's ape man would displace the most famous hominid ever discovered, Lucy. The discoverer of Lucy, Dr. Donald Johanson, was not okay with this and ended up going after the Libyan fossil, only to find that the famed ape man collarbone was the rib of a dolphin. In 1965, scientists thought that proconsul was bipedal, which is a term of walking upright, but today it is well known to be just a monkey. Also in 1965, scientists thought that Ramapithecus was bipedal. They said the earliest man-like primitive primate found so far, but today it's well known to be just an ape. We know that Archaeoraptor was a fraud. We all know about this scientific fraud published in National Geographic from our last class in Biology 2. Let's also take a look at what's called artistic licensing. Points of interest such as the white of eyes and the amount of hair are not found in the fossil record. Apes and monkeys do not have whites in their eyes like humans do. When museums are having exhibits built, they often rely on exhibit creators and artists to be creative in their interpretation of fossils and facts that are missing. They will insert whites into the exhibit eyes to make them seem more human-like. This is not evidenced in the fossil record because eyes do not fossilize. The artist from National Geographic was quoted in 1996 saying, quote, "I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate something about where she was headed." Now, this makes you question what this artist is trying to do and convey with their interpretation. So now let's look at human-type bones. We're going to look at Neanderthals, Erectus, and the Floresiensis, or also known as Hobbit. Homo sapiens is the scientific name for modern humans. Paleontologist Clive Finlayson in the BBC Science News in 2016 said, "The irony is the scientific community is going to have to come around to the acceptance that the Denisovans and the Neanderthals also belong to the species we call Homo sapiens." The original Neanderthal bones discovered in the Neander Valley in Dusseldorf, Germany in 1856. And since then, nearly 500 Neanderthal skeletons have been found in Europe, in the Middle East, and also in Western Asia. The shape of the skull, which is typically elongated front to back. The result is a pushed back forehead, which exposes strong brow ridges. The brain case of Neanderthals were large, typically larger than most modern humans. They are not significantly different from modern man from the neck down. And now let's look at the dehumanization of Neanderthals. In 1908, a nearly complete Neanderthal skeleton, dubbed the Old Man, was discovered in a cave in France by the famous paleontologist Marcellin Boule of the National Museum of Natural History of Paris. Despite his prestige, the paleontological community now regards his reconstruction of Old Man to be one of the worst reconstructions of a skeleton. It was made to appear very apish, with a grasping big toe and a bent knee, bent hip posture. Boule's characterization inspired the first artistic depiction of a Neanderthal. Some high-profile scientist endorsements helped to promote a grossly inaccurate view of Neanderthals to the world. The Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History website tells of Boule's fraudulent reconstruction. Quote, "Why popular culture stereotyped Neanderthals as dim-witted brutes for so many years? The Old Man suffered from gross deforming osteoarthritis, a degenerative disease. Boule even gave his reconstruction an opposite big toe, like the great apes, but there was no bone deformity that should or could have led to this interpretation. Boule's grossly misrepresented Neanderthal more than a century and a half ago, yet his ape-like caricature is still deeply embedded in modern culture." Newer museum displays are replacing the outdated representations. In keeping with the latest DNA analysis, Neanderthal replacement displays now appear more modern in appearance. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens skeletons are extremely similar. Neanderthals did have denser bones and a slightly heavier skeleton structure. Like a large part of the human race, Mr. Valuev carries Neanderthal DNA. Even today, paleo experts debate about whether certain skulls should be classed as Homo sapiens of Neanderthals because they are not readily indistinguishable. The contact between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals is described by experts as, quote, "extensive and long-lasting." So let's look at a case study, the Pit of Bones in northern Spain in 1992. At least 28 individuals were found, including 3 well-preserved skulls. The Pit of Bones demonstrates that all 3 species, I'm talking about Erectus, Neanderthal, and Homo sapiens, they coexisted in the same place at the same time and can be arranged into morphological continuum, reflecting diversity within a single interbreeding population. In 2016, it was reported in Nature, an analysis of a small segment of nuclear and mitochondrial DNA extracted from 5 bone samples from within this pit, presumably different individuals. The nuclear DNA indicated that the Denisovian ancestors were the same. This supports the interpretation that they had different genetic histories, yet could all interbreed and are one species, Homo sapien. Neanderthal DNA is 99.7% identical to present-day human DNA. And archaeology confirms Neanderthals had modern human intelligence. Finlayson told BBC News in 2010, quote, "Neanderthals weren't stupid apes, but were humans, and they interbred with our ancestors. But in spite of the evidence, there are still those who will resist. We have found no data in support of the supposed technological, social, and cognitive inferiority of Neanderthals compared to anatomically modern human contemporaries. The Neanderthal archaeological record was not different enough to support the purported cognitive gap between them and our contemporary modern humans. The evidence for cognitive inferiority is simply not there. As you can see on the slide, there is an extensive list of complex tasks and thinking Neanderthals were fully capable of. For example, cordage, which is knot making, abstract thinking, controlled use of fire, human language, art and sculpturing, ceremonial burying of their dead, musical instruments, etc. And then on to cavemen. The Neanderthals sometimes lived in caves, so they were technically cavemen. But this in no way implies they were inferior. Neanderthal bones were found where glaciers stopped during the Ice Age. The Bible repeatedly mentions people living in caves, such as Lot and his 2 daughters in Genesis 19. Job mentions that some people were living in caves during his time in Job 30. Many Neanderthal skeletons have been found buried in caves, and it is quite interesting to note that this burial practice was apparently common in Abraham's time. Abraham buried his wife, Sarah, in a cave in Genesis 23. And Abraham himself was later buried in the same cave by Isaac and Ishmael in chapter 25 of Genesis. David, while he was fleeing from Saul in 1 Samuel, the 100 prophets that were hidden by Obadiah from Queen Jezebel in 1 Kings, and those persecuted by the world in Hebrews 11. So let's look at Homo erectus. We can see the 4 skulls on the slide. Erectus is essentially the ape to man story, and so many textbooks, museums, and TV programs still insist that Erectus is less than human. Their primary argument is based upon the fact that Erectus had an atypical skull, very similar to Neanderthal. However, unlike Neanderthal, Erectus had a reduced brain volume. In addition, some Erectus bones indicate reduced body size and other pathologies. Now, there is evidence that these traits can be best understood by being the result of interbreeding and genetic degeneration. The most striking features of Erectus are small body size and reduced brain volume. Being a hunter-gatherer, Erectus lived in isolation over many generations in remote places, such as the Indonesian islands of Java and Flores. Under such conditions, distinctive skeletal features are expected to arise and become established in small populations. In 1891, the Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois discovered the first fossil remains that are currently classified as Homo erectus. These bones came to be popularly recognized by the general public as Java man. Since then, numerous bones from Java and China have been found and reassigned to Homo erectus. However, as is typical in the field of paleontology, experts disagree about how to interpret this fossil. Some view these bones as early Homo sapiens. Now, worldwide, there have been over 300 Erectus finds, most often consisting of isolated skull caps and or a few bones and teeth. For example, Java and Peking man. Many Erectus skulls appear deformed or asymmetrical. These individuals suffered from pathologies. Now, below the neck, one expert had noted, quote, "The differences between Homo erectus and today's man can only be detected by an experienced anatomist." The Institute of Human Origins, founded by Dr. Donald Johanson, posted an article affirming this assessment. They note that aside from being more heavily built, in every other aspect, they share striking similarities with modern Homo sapiens. Until recently, only one nearly complete Erectus skeleton has been recovered, which was dubbed Turkana Boy. It was found in Kenya in 1984 and is the only Homo erectus skeleton where the skull has been found clearly associated with the rest of the body. Quoting a researcher, Seddon, a human researcher on evolution and author of the book Humans from the Beginning, said, quote, "Turkana Boy was unquestionably human. Dental evidence dates the adolescent to no older than 12 to 13 years of age and would have been 5 foot 3 inches, but if he had lived to adulthood, he could have grown to 6 foot 1. Next is the Erectus skull morphology. With the Zika virus, children can be born with severe microcephaly, which is a reduced brain volume compared to Erectus. Microcephaly can produce pronounced brow ridges, abnormally small brain cases, constricted temples, etc., all commonly seen in erectus skulls. Caves are also hotspots for natural sources of radiation. Thus, it is conceivable that radiation-induced diseases comparable to microcephaly produce some of the anomalies that we see in the skull shapes found in the erectus species. The reduced cranial capacity commonly found in erectus skulls is often cited as evidence they were subhuman ancestors. It is generally believed that before we evolved into modern Homo sapiens, we had smaller brains and significantly reduced intelligence. Erectus had smaller brain volumes, but were they less intelligent than modern man? Not necessarily. Brain size varies according to body size and does not clearly correlate with intelligence. Erectus was typically much smaller than the average human today and would have naturally had a smaller brain. The average woman has a smaller brain when compared to men. But this reflects overall body size and does not mean women are less intelligent. Whales have enormous brains, but it doesn't mean that they're smarter than humans. As psychologists have noted in the journal Intelligence, quote, there is no strong direct relationship between brain size and intelligence among modern humans. Additional evidence can be cited to argue of the fully human status of erectus. Production of fibers and resins, knot-making, language, speech, communication, cooking food, reasoning, foresight, planning, ingenuity, coordinated hunting, bead necklace creation, controlled use of fire and fireplaces. Erectus genetic degeneration. So let's look at a modern example of the pygmies of Central Africa and South Africa. These remnant populations have until recently lived in extreme isolation for many generations. The average life expectancy is 40 to 50 years in South Africa, but only 16 to 24 years in Central Africa. Adult males on average are no taller than 4'9" and females even shorter. Hunter-gathering groups must live in small bands to survive. This leads to very serious problems associated with genetic interbreeding. Populations of less than 100 individuals will, over many generations, always show evidence of inbreeding, resulting in many types of genetic pathologies. These groups tend to be chronically undernourished, facing repeated cycles of starvation. It is well established that the reduced size in general, but especially reduced brain size, is adaptive in undernourished populations. So our conclusion, Erectus was fully human. There is strong evidence that the bones commonly referred to as Homo erectus are fully human individuals who suffered from various pathologies associated with such things as interbreeding, mutation, development, abnormalities, etc. Claims that Erectus was a subhuman species are clearly contested among leading evolutionary paleo experts. While some insist Erectus was morphologically distinct from modern man, others point out that Erectus morphology overlaps extensively with modern humans, and so Erectus should be reclassified as Homo sapien. Erectus had extensive existence of time with modern humans and was not an ancestor. Next up is Homo floresiensis, or also referred to as Hobbit. In 2003, a team of paleoanthropologists led by Michael Morwood and Peter Brown were exploring a limestone cave known as Cold Cave on the Indonesian islands of Flores. To their surprise, they discovered a nearly complete skull and a partial skeleton, formerly designated LB1. The skull of LB1 was very small, maybe 1/3 the size of a normal human, and had extremely small cranial capacity. Their initial reaction was that it was a child. However, its fully emerged wisdom teeth, brow ridges, and other features suggested it was a female, adult, which stood at about 3 foot 6 inches tall. Brown thought that it might be a diseased human with growth disorders, but soon decided that it was a new species entirely. By 2009, the number of individuals found had been increased to 14. By 2012, a lead author of a paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science explained, quote, "It all clicked. I could see all the signs of the bones were compatible with Down syndrome. There are about 20 or so characteristics that are matching. There is not a single characteristic of LB1 that doesn't match." So initially, Hobbit was expected to have the intellect of a chimpanzee, since its cranial capacity was a similar size. But again, when it comes to brain size, bigger isn't necessarily better. Paleo expert Dean Falk digitally reconstructed LB1's brain shape by taking CT scans of the interior brain case. The analysis revealed that Hobbit looked most similar to Erectus, only smaller. Falk was stunned to find distinct temporal lobes that reveal Hobbit's cognition was just as advanced as modern humans. Now, evolutionists have noted that stone artifacts associated with Hobbit exhibit a level of sophistication on par with those of human craftsmen. Quote, Homo phosphorescens is said to have manufactured implements that exhibit a level of sophistication elsewhere associated exclusively with Homo sapiens, according to paleo expert Morwood. Similarly, reported in the journal Nature, quote, the cognitive capabilities of early Hobbit, however, should not be underestimated, as indicated by the technology of stone artifacts associated with Hobbit. Some of the sophisticated tools found by excavators include microblades, carefully sharpened spearheads, large blades, and other artifacts needed to hunt, transport, and butcher large animals living on an island. So let's look at the island dwarfism hypothesis. Insular dwarfism is a well-documented phenomenon. Mammals living on an island can become smaller over generations. This is typically seen in island-dwelling species with access to a limited food supply. Such dwarfed populations are reproductively isolated by many generations and must survive in very small populations. Under these conditions, severe interbreeding occurs, as well as selection for reduced body size and brain volume. The fossil record of dwarfed elephants no longer than 1 meter in height have been found on other islands such as Sicily, Malta, and Crete. Paleo experts state there is very strong morphological evidence that Hobbit was anomalous with a population of Homo sapiens, suffering from the consequences of genetic isolation, interbreeding, deleterious mutations that can best be described as island dwarfism. So our conclusion is that Erectus was just a variant of Homo sapiens, of modern man. Hobbit can be understood as an extreme version of Erectus, more isolated, more inbred, more dwarfed. Now, when anthropologists use homology to try and support evolutionary theory, there's a problem. So let's use dogs as an example. Here on the slide, we have 2 dogs, and they're both dogs. The 2 dogs have very different skulls, but they're still both dogs. Additionally, here's a picture on the slide of the world's shortest and tallest man. Very different, but are 100% human, made in God's image. Now, let's look at examples of the apes, animals, and the habilis. So I'm going to be referring to a couple of big words: Australopithecus, Australopithecines, Ardipithecus. And these are all ape-like, what are called hominids. There are multiple groupings that anthropologists have named these fossil finds, but we're going to focus on the 3 most popular: Lucy, Sediba, and Ardi. In 1973, Dr. Donald Johanson discovered the fossils in Ethiopia that were dramatic and almost unbelievable. The bones of a 3-million-year-old hominid, a prehistoric man. These bones led him to believe that they were from a woman, Lucy, who walked on 2 feet. Johanson claimed that Afarensis represented the oldest hominid fossils found, which was the ancestor to all later hominids, including Homo sapiens. Johanson's reassessment made him a, quote, paleoanthropological superstar, and his beloved Lucy became the most famous hominid fossil ever discovered. Johanson recounts that since he was a teenager, he had always, quote, dreamed of traveling to Africa and finding the missing link. The oldest hominid bones were believed to be no older than 2 million years. The thought of finding the oldest hominid fossils yet to be discovered was tantalizing. Johanson explains, quote, if our preliminary dating of the Hadar deposits was correct, I was holding the knee joint of a hominid over 3 million years old, the earliest record of walking bipedal ancestor yet discovered. However, many leading paleo experts have rejected Johanson's claim about Afarensis, also known as Lucy, as a sound species and the ancestor to us all. So let's look at big problem number 1. There was no feet, hands, or lower back lumbar bones found of Lucy. So when paleo expert Mary Leakey found old footprints in a rock layer in Laetoli, Africa, Dr. Johansen said this was proof that ancestors like Lucy are walking. But there's a big problem number 2. Again, no feet bones of Lucy were ever found. And the footprints were 1.5 million years older than Lucy's bones, and the Laetoli footprints were 1,000 miles away. Big problem number 3. Dr. Johansen has always made a big deal about the knee of Lucy and showed human ancestry. It was in fact walking, or what's called bipedal. But the skeleton called Lucy does not have an intact knee bone. The shin bone and the thigh bone Dr. Donald Johansen used to suggest this point were found 1.5 miles away and also in rock 230 feet deeper in different rock strata. Again, this is what Johansen uses to justify Lucy's knee, and that Lucy walked upright. Big problem number 4. Lucy's hip pelvis bone looked like and was an ape hip pelvis. So let's just watch a quick video on Dr. Johansen and his colleague Owen Lovejoy and what they decided to do.
The ape that stood up, it was a revolutionary idea. We needed Owen Lovejoy's expertise again, because the evidence wasn't quite adding up. The knee looked human, but the shape of her hip didn't. Superficially, her hip resembled a chimpanzee's, which meant that Lucy couldn't possibly have walked like a modern human. But Lovejoy noticed something odd about the way the bones had been fossilized.
When I put the two parts of the pelvis together that we had, this part of the pelvis has pressed so hard and so completely into this one that it caused it to be broken into a series of individual pieces which were then fused together in later fossilization. This has caused the two bones, in fact, to fit together so well that they're in an anatomically impossible position.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bone seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost. Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
The Lucy conclusion: the bones that are now known as Australopithecus afarensis include bones that appear to be ape and other bones that appear to be human. These bones have been highly contested ever since afarensis was named. There is no better way to make an ape man than to combine ape bones with human bones. People have not been told the full story about afarensis, Lucy. The vast majority of students and the general public have never been exposed to the competing views. Textbooks and popular press give the misleading impression that there is only one view in the paleontological community. This is the view promoted by Johansen that depicts Lucy and her kind as the apes that stood up. But according to Dr. Carl Warner, Dr. Johansen has hid Lucy's fossils from anthropologists to study for over 51 years. Next up is Homo habilis. Homo habilis is an all-embracing, quote, wastebasket, species into which a whole heterogeneous variety of fossils could be conveniently swept, according to paleontologist Ian Tattersall. He's the curator of the American Natural History Museum in New York City. In the early 1960s, paleo experts Louis and Mary Leakey found bones in Tanzania, which they claimed were the remains of the earliest humans. They named these bones Homo habilis. The bones were thought to bridge the gap between apes and man. Most of the bones looked very ape-like, being similar to the Australopithecines. Some looked distinctly human-like, and additionally, there were many stone tools present. This seems like ape-like creatures, were on their way to becoming human and were already making and using stone tools. It is important to note that Homo habilis had 0 skeleton bones found, only some skull fragments. From their discovery until 2008, so more than 4 decades, these bones and bone fragments were the only candidate bones that might bridge the gap between ape-like Australopiths and man. It also made the Leakeys world-famous celebrities. Habilis was predominantly displayed in textbooks, museums, and popular media broadcasts. Without habilis, the ape-to-man story did not hold together. So let's look at handyman. In 1964, Louis Leakey announced the discovery of Homo habilis, which they nicknamed Handyman for the inferred tool-making abilities. But Leakey should have considered the obvious possibility that the stone tools were manufactured and used by Homo sapiens, or erectus, but not habilis. There were modern human-looking bones that have been found in the same bone bed, including a complete human skeleton, an anatomically modern human foot, and a human leg bone that were incorrectly assigned to robust apes that were also found there. Additionally, there were archaeological layers displaying clear evidence of modern habitation, including shelter, a wide variety of sophisticated stone tools, and thousands of butchered bones. So why didn't Leakey separate the apes from the human bones? Virtually all of the bones attributed to habilis were found in isolated bones or bone fragments. None of the bones were found physically connected to the other bones. This means that the paleo experts cannot reliably reconstruct even a partial habilis skeleton. Even skull reconstructions are highly questionable. These bones were found in mixed bone beds containing catfish, pigs, tortoise, apes, monkeys, and humans. Under such conditions, it's arguably impossible to know for certain which bones belong to which individuals or species. The isolated bones were found randomly scattered across an excavated area and were jumbled together. So the conclusion is that habilis is a jumble of Homo, human, and the Australopithecines, the apes. Next up is Sediba. The authors of Contested Bones call this group of bones, quote, the muddle in the middle. Paleoanthropologist John Hawks of the University of Wisconsin said, it's not everything the rumor mill said it was going to be. It is not a missing link. The remains of an adolescent male dubbed hominid 1 on the left and the adult female dubbed hominid number 2 on the right. Both are claimed to represent a single new species, Australopithecus sediba. The first specimen attributed to Sediba was found in 2008 by Lee Berger, a paleo expert who identified the bones as a juvenile Australopithecine. Additional bones were found soon after. They included a skull, portions of upper and lower limbs, ribs, vertebrae, hip fragments, and elements of hands and feet. A month later, Berger discovered a second species believed to be the same species. Since then, at least 4 other specimens have been found, 2 infants and 2 adults. The bones were buried together in a mixed bed containing thousands of at least 18 different species, including Homo, Australopithecus, and primates, apes. The remains were, quote, buried together in a single debris flow. Lee Berger and colleagues said that Sediba, quote, may be the best candidate yet for the immediate ancestor to our genus Homo. Sediba would take habilis' position in the family tree and dethrone Lucy and her kind of our direct ancestor in the process. Well, Dr. Johansen, discoverer of Lucy and her kind Afarensis, was adamantly opposed to having his species replaced by Sediba. In 2014, the New Scientist stated that Sediba has a strange mix of human and Australopithecine qualities. Some say that if various bones had been found separately, they would have been assumed to be altogether different species. So Sediba, as you can see on the slide, the spine and the jaw appear to be mixed bones. The hip bone is human. The rib cage is ape. The upper limbs are human. The hand is human. So Sediba's hands closely resemble that of modern humans, with long thumb relative to short fingers. Human hands give us the unique ability to grip and carefully manipulate objects between the thumb and fingers. Stone tools were recovered from where the remains of Sediba were found. So the conclusion is Sediba is a jumble of human and ape bones. Sediba does not appear to represent a, quote, transitional form at all, or a new species, but simply is just a mixture of human and non-human bones. Berger admits that this was always his lifelong ambition. Berger, like his role model, Dr. Donald Johanson, seems to have spent a lifetime chasing after the honor of finding the missing link that would validate human evolution. Sediba is essentially the same as habilis. It's an artificial taxon consisting of a loose collection of human and ape bones. This would explain why the discovery team was so puzzled by the, quote, anatomical contradictions. Scientists often refer to a mixture of human and ape bones as what they call a conflation. According to Dr. Carl Warner, Dr. Lee Berger has hid Sediba's fossils from anthropologists to study for over 16 years. Next up is Naledi. In 2013, 2 cave explorers climbed 90 feet underground into the Rising Star cave system in South Africa. The cavers stumbled upon a collection of human bones. They contacted paleo expert Lee Berger, who had discovered Sediba just 5 years earlier. Shortly after, Berger called National Geographic and began to celebrate. The cave chamber yielded 1,500 bones, or bone fragments, belonging to 15 very incomplete individuals. Only a few of the bones were physically connected to other bones. The remains were assigned a new species, Homo naledi. Out of the 1,500 recovered partial or complete bones, half of them, shown in the picture, were analyzed. The skeleton in the middle is a composite, assembled of the bones belonging to multiple individuals. Overall, the anatomy was very human, hence National Geographic's headline, quote, almost human. But did Naledi have ape-like bones? Well, Berger told National Geographic, quote, the message we're getting is of an animal right on the cusp of transition from the Australopithecus to Homo. Not surprising, this interpretation is consistent with Berger's lifelong dream of finding the crucial missing link, and his views are potentially colored by personal bias, as is everyone. Even before Naledi was assigned an age, Berger had already proclaimed in his findings to the world as the root ancestor to the genus Homo, just as he had claimed about Sediba. The Naledi bones, like those of Erectus, had some features that are atypical, but still overlap with modern human variations. So let's look at Naledi's human skull and brain case. Naledi's skull appears even more modern than the skulls of Homo erectus. Berger and colleagues affirm this, saying, quote, the morphology of the cranium and the mandible and the teeth is most consistent with the genus Homo, but the brain size of Naledi is within the range of the Australopithecus. It was primarily on the basis of small brain size that Naledi was demoted to less than human. Yet, as discussed earlier, neuro brain size is not what defines humanness. Naledi had human feet. The clearest anatomical distinction that separates all apes from human is the structure of the foot. The human foot is truly unique. Dan Lieberman, who's a paleoanthropologist of Harvard University, agrees, stating, quote, the foot is indeed strikingly human and suggests it walked and possibly ran much like modern man. Naledi had human hands. The human hand is also very distinctive, which reliably distinguishes man from ape. In a study published in the journal Nature in 2015, researchers acknowledged, quote, the hand is one of the most distinctive traits of humankind. The human hand can be distinguished from that of apes by its long thumb relative to the fingers. Naledi had human shoulders and human ribs. Naledi also had a human hip. Evidence for a deliberate disposal of the dead. Only humans use fire to light caves, and only humans bury their dead. The vertical chute leading down into the chamber is 40 feet deep and 7.5 inches wide at its narrowest point. Now, the researchers at the journal eLife ruled out all possible other possibilities of separate entranceways, predators, etc. All of their observations consistently suggest a burial site. These facts have led researchers to the very logical conclusion that Naledi, quote, deliberately disposed of its dead inside the chamber. Well, Berger had originally proposed that they expected Naledi to represent the inception of the genus Homo, living sometime between 2 to 3 million years ago. based on morphology of the bones. Well, 2 years after the discovery paper was published, a date was finally assigned to Naledi, dating to only 237,000 years to 335,000 years. This was a game changer. Naledi was not millions of years old. So the conclusion is the discovery of Naledi bones made a huge media splash, a flood of popular press articles and news outlets, including the front page of the New York Times, which showcased Naledi as conclusive proof of human evolution. The front cover of National Geographic offered the catchy headline, "Almost Human." Now, preeminent scientific authorities, including leading evolutionary paleo experts, have dismissed claims made by Berger and other colleagues regarding Naledi. And now the paleo community as a whole rejects Naledi as a possible missing link. Just the latest developments on this, the latest endocast scans of the brain case further support the fully human status of Naledi. And just to wrap up things, let's look at Ida. Ida is a stunningly well-preserved fossil that has been hailed as, quote, our connection with the rest of the mammals. A massive publicity campaign, including books, videos, a website, public unveilings, coincided in May 2009 publication of a scientific study conducted on the fossil. Norwegian paleontologist Jorn Hurum, in the picture with Ida skeleton, nicknamed Ida after his daughter. Ida was advertised as, quote, the missing link between humans and other mammals, and its announcement was accompanied by a 2-hour television documentary that had been published beforehand. According to Hurum, Ida represented, quote, the closest thing we can get to a direct ancestor. In a newspaper interview, he called the fossil, quote, our Mona Lisa, and another member of the team called it, quote, the 8th wonder of the world. But published statements from creation and evolutionary scientists alike indicated that Ida's accolades as a missing link were thoroughly undeserved. In the bicentennial year of Darwin, it is hardly surprising that there was huge fanfare about the well-preserved fossil, this missing link, which was launched at a conference by Michael Bloomberg, who at the time was mayor of New York City. However, Ida was just a dead lemur. Ida was very much like the lemurs living today. So it was actually more evidence of stasis than a missing link. And now we have the discovery of Ardi. Another fossil was described in 2009 without quite so much hype. Ardipithecus ramidus, nicknamed Ardi, had first been found in 1992, but it was in very poor condition. The fossil's discoverer, Tim White, called it roadkill. The skull was squished, and he said, the other bones were so chalky that when he cleaned the edges, it eroded. So I had to mold every one of the broken pieces to reconstruct it. After many years, White and his team finally described the fossil in detail. They concluded that it was much older than Lucy and that Ardi walked on 2 feet, even though the entire skeleton was digitally reconstructed. Anatomist Owen Lovejoy was given the role of digitally reconstructing Ardi's crushed hip. It is quite clear that Lovejoy digitally reconstructed the hip to look the way he imagined, to support the preconceived idea that Ardi had walked habitually upright like modern humans. Premature conclusions of this type reveal what's called a treasure hunt mentality. The strong desire to discover a missing link no doubt clouded their ability to be objective. When White and colleagues first proclaimed to the world that they had found the oldest human ancestor in 1994 in the Journal of Nature, the only available remains that could be studied at the time consisted primarily of teeth plus a few broken pieces of the base of the skull and some arm fragments. The initial bone fragments attributed to the species were found in several localities around a mile apart. The lumbar vertebrae were entirely missing. This meant that all artistic renditions in the museum displays that show Ardi with a human-like lumbar curvature and consequently upright human posture have no supporting evidence. They are essentially a fabrication. Ardi had ape teeth. Ardi's hands and feet were quite clearly an ordinary ape, very similar to modern chimpanzees. So the conclusion is that Ardi was fully ape. Leading evolutionary paleo experts have challenged virtually every claim put forth by the discovery team regarding Ardi. Detailed criticisms have been reported in numerous peer-reviewed scientific journals, including Science, Nature, Annual Review of Anthropology, the Journal of Comparative Human Biology. The authors of these papers are respected paleoanthropologists that seem to represent the prevailing view held by the paleo community. It really is unfortunate that the views of these scientists have not been made widely known to the general public and to students. The alternative view, that Artie is merely an extinct ape, is not even mentioned in the textbooks. Instead, essentially all textbooks now list Artie as the oldest known ancestor, arguing that it is another conclusive proof of human evolution. So the march of progress that we looked at earlier in the presentation really should be updated to basically show that there is man and there are apes. In a summary, this is Dr. Brian Thomas looking at these three categories or buckets. You have animals like Ida, Lucy, Artie. And then on the far other side, you have humans. You have Neanderthal, Erectus, and Hobbit. And then in the middle, that muddle in the middle, you have Habilis and Java Man. And then we have frauds and the overzealousness of things like Piltdown Man and Java Man. This is Dr. Robert Carter saying, if evolution was true, there should have been trillions of people according to population models. If 1 million people lived over the course of 1 million years, where are all the bodies? They do not exist. And in the book Science and Human Origins, the authors say the Darwinian belief that humans evolved from ape-like species requires inferences that go beyond the evidence and is not supported by the fossil record. There are still no missing links. Charles Darwin wrote Origins of Species in 1859 and Descent of Man in 1871. So over 150 years of ape to man is still listed as top evidence of evolution. So what does Scripture say? But now ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you, and speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. And 2 books I'll plug, obviously Contested Bones, a tremendous resource, and also Dr. Carl Warner's book, Human Evolution, The Grand Experiment, Volume 3. Dr. Carl Warner has also produced a series of DVDs. I would recommend on this topic the episodes 3, 4, 5, which are on one DVD, and then the other DVD that has episodes 6, 7, and 8. Tremendous resource. Thank you so much.